Coming up in this hour.
And I don't think many girls get the support they need to make the right career choices. I didn't know when I was at school that one day I could run a FTSE business. It didn't occur to me that those were choices that I could even think about in business until I was much older.
That was Ruby McGregor-Smith, chair of the Women's Business Council, who says we need more women in the workplace. I'll be speaking to her very shortly. I'll also be joined live in the studio by anti-feminist Mike Buchanan, who couldn't disagree with her more. He says it takes time to train up women who then simply go off and have babies, which ends up costing the UK economy millions of pounds. What do you think? Are you a businesswoman? If so, get in touch with me. Would you like to see more women in business? Here's the number, 08459 455 555. Now, do you think that there should be more women in business? Would you like to see more women in the office, up and down the country, running companies or being senior members of management? Would that be a good idea? Do you think there are frankly too few women in the workplace at the moment? Very shortly, I'm going to meet a man who absolutely feels that that is the last thing we need. Well, why on earth would he say that? Before we hear from him, though, let me speak to Ruby McGregor-Smith, who's Chief Executive of Mitie and Chair of the Women's Business Council. Hello to you, Ruby.
Good morning.
Morning. You'd like to see more women in business, I understand.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's really critical that more women can really show their talents in the workplace. I think it would be fantastic to have more women at every level in business.
Why do we need more women in particular? Surely what we need are the best people for the jobs.
Absolutely, and I think there are many obstacles for women today to actually get into those best jobs. I think certainly, when you think about when they start out of school, they do incredibly well, but I think confidence can be a real issue, and aspiration, and saying, look, of course you can go into what were traditionally male-dominated careers. They tend not to choose many of those. I think when they then have young families, again, it's quite tough. I found that very tough. But if you get good support, you can then come back. And again, many don't come back because of the challenges they have, not just in having a family, but also because the costs of childcare are too high. So if you begin to take out some of these obstacles, it's going to happen anyway, because I think you're absolutely right. You need the right talent at the top of business. And when I look at talent in my own business, I see both fantastic men and women, but I don't see as many women as I expect to, because they make different choices, because A, their lifestyles can be tougher, particularly if they have young families, but two, I think you get real issues on confidence still, and them wanting to put themselves forward for fantastic jobs when they're equally capable.
So is it women to blame then?
Absolutely not. I think it's also around just at the moment, I think very much if you take a look at the UK, you still have very male-dominated environments, and I think women find it tough in those. And I think, therefore, it's really important that if you are a woman in business today, such as me, you have to absolutely highlight the fact that we want to see more.
Is there still discrimination?
I think it's difficult for me to judge because I don't actually see that, but I think definitely if you take a look at choices, you just don't see women going into more male-dominated environments, and you have to say to yourself, is that because they don't feel comfortable? And for many of them that talk to me, they certainly don't.
There is, of course, this feeling now, and certainly many people, particularly younger people with kind of modern attitudes, they have the feeling that women should, where possible, have it all. They should be able to have the career, they should be able to have the family. And there are lots of other people who say it's just not possible to combine all of that. It's simply not possible. Something has got to give. And in most women's lives, it tends to be the career. Most women will start their career, they then have a family, and they're prepared to put their career on the back burner for the sake of their family. Do you think that is the biggest obstacle to women getting to the kind of positions that, say, you're in?
I think so. You can't have it all at every stage. I never had it all at any stage. I had to take time out when my children were younger because I found it really, really hard to work. And I think confidence plays a big part because I found that really, really hard. But once they're a little bit older, I got a little bit more support. And once they were at school, I felt I could go back. And I think the positive story about that is that I was one of those women that couldn't have it all. But I've managed to kind of find more through flexible working and really supportive people I've worked for, an ability to actually get there. And if I can do it, I really don't see why anybody else can't do it.
Can you understand, though, why many employers would perhaps look at a male candidate and a female candidate for the same job. They're both kind of equally qualified. They're both very good and would potentially be great at the job, but they're both around the age of, 28, 29. And the employer thinks to him or herself, well, if I employ the female candidate, are we going to get 2 years down the lane where we suddenly find that we've given her all this training, she's up to scratch, and then suddenly we're told that she's going off for a year, and we'll have to then spend money on retraining someone else to come in and fulfill her job while she's off having her children, whereas if I was to employ the man, I won't have that potential threat. Can you understand that?
Not anymore. I think that's really, really, really outdated. If you take a look at any business that actually takes on women in their early 20s, they've trained and recruited and worked with them already. If they then give them the flexibility they need to manage the demands they may have when they have a young family, from a loyalty perspective, they'll get them back, they'll get the drive, the ambition back, they'll get people back that are absolutely fantastically committed to their business. That pays for the absolute challenge you do have when women are away and they do need time out when they have children. But I don't just see that happening today. I have more and more of my young guys in our business who ask me for more time out when they have young families. The world is really changing, and I just think attitudes need to completely change.
They wouldn't take a year off, would they? I mean, I've got friends who have had very successful careers, and they've had babies, and they've said to me, oh, I've told my employer I'm only going to take 3 months or 6 months off, but actually I'm going to take a year, but I'm not going to tell them that I'm taking a year until towards the end of the 6 months, because, I want to still keep my job and I want to have it available to me. So I don't want them, if they say I'm going to be off for a year, they might get someone who's absolutely brilliant to come in and fulfill my job for a whole year. So in some ways, they're manipulating the companies, aren't they?
No, I think you're going to see that less and less. I think modern employers today who really want to get their businesses to grow and do well are looking for the best talent, and I think they're absolutely prepared and committed to really manage the challenge for when women have children. I think it's more and more outdated attitudes. And if you look at the best businesses, and you take a look at some of the case studies we've got for the Women's Business Council, there are fantastic examples of why working through that phase and being flexible with women really works. I just think those attitudes in 10 years' time won't even be talked about because they won't exist.
Ruby, very interesting to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time. There's Ruby McGregor-Smith, who's the Chief Executive of Mitie and also the Chair of the Women's Business Council. I want to hear from you. What do you think? Would you like to see more women in business? If you run a company, if you are a business owner, whether you're a man or a woman, typically, who do you prefer to employ? Who do you prefer to have in your business, men or women? Or do you think the days of even deciding to choose one sex over the other, they should absolutely be long behind us? And anybody that does still choose a man because he's less likely to go off and have children and leave the company for a period of time, perhaps you think they should be ashamed of themselves. 08459 455 555. Well, listening to Ruby, in the studio with me was Mike Buchanan. He describes himself as part of the anti-feminist movement. Morning to you, Mike. Thanks for coming in.
It's a pleasure, Jonathan.
So would you like to see more women in business?
I think, first of all, we need to understand why it is that men outnumber women considerably at the top of major businesses in particular. The reasons are very well understood, and discrimination against women isn't one of them. In the year 2000, the renowned sociologist Catherine Hackim published her preference theory. And her research showed that while 4 in 7 British men are work-centred, only 1 in 7 British women is. So we'd expect men to dominate the top of major businesses for this reason alone. Now, if we add in the fact that almost 2/3 of employees in the private sector are men, and men have traditionally outnumbered women in the disciplines which lead to the boardroom, notably finance, we'd expect men to hold over 90% of major corporate board positions. And they now hold little more than 80% of them. So if anything, women are already overrepresented on major corporate boards.
You say they're overrepresented, and we'll get on to that point in a second, but I want to go back to my initial question because I noticed you didn't answer it. I said to you, would you like to see more women in business? And instead you instantly began reading me statistics.
Well, because I think it's important people understand why it is that men do dominate the top businesses. Would I like more women? I would like men and women to be appointed solely on the basis of merit, which is exactly what we campaign for at the Campaign for Merit in Business. One of the things in the Women's Business Council report said, they're saying that GDP would rise if more women went out to work and so on. And the same would be true of men, of course, but nobody mentions that. And there are more unemployed men than there are unemployed women. But do we really want to value women as nothing more than economic units, as workhorses? When women say they want a better work-life balance, do they ever mean that they want more work, or do they mean they want more life? In a recent survey of over 1,200 women over 25 in full-time work and with a partner, almost 80% said they would prefer to be financially dependent on their partner and not work.
You're saying that 80% of women would like to be financially dependent on their partner rather than working?
Yes.
So you believe that, are you telling me then that 80% of my listeners, my female listeners, would rather, if push came to shove, they would rather stay at home and be the homemaker rather than go to work?
That's precisely what the survey said.
My word. Well, if women listening to the programme would like to comment on that, 08459 455 555.
They also, if I could just add one thing, Jonathan, they also, the majority of women said that they felt pressure from other women to be financially independent. So there's this curious bullying of women into the workplace. An awful lot of women, every survey that I'm aware of says that women would rather work fewer hours than they are.
But if you take a woman who has a career that she is very good at, and a woman that has cared very passionately about the career that she had, then surely it's absolutely right and proper that she should have exactly the same opportunities to climb that career ladder as any man in the same industry.
But she has. I mean, it's just a complete myth that there's any sort of glass ceiling.
If that's the case, and you want to talk statistics, and I have one or two statistics up my sleeve for you. Very good. If you take the top FTSE 100 companies, only 15% of the chief executives of the top FTSE 100 companies are women. The rest are all men. If you look at...
But I've explained to you the reason, because 4 times as many men as women are work-centred. So that you'd immediately expect at least 80% of FTSE 100 directors to be men.
So you're saying it's just circumstances that mean that men are there? It's
not circumstances, it's the fact that far more men have the work ethic necessary to get to the top of major businesses than women. And it's very important...
Let me stop you there. Let me pick you up on that point. But many more men have the work ethic. Are you saying that women don't have the same kind of work ethic?
No, I'm saying that there are women who have that work ethic. I mean, I started
but typically, are you saying that women have less of a work ethic than men?
No, I'm saying that there are far, far more men who have the work ethic required to get to the top of major businesses than there are women.
So more men have a greater work ethic.
Yes,
than
indeed.
Women.
And one thing that really underlines this is the fact that virtually all the women in the FTSE 100 have been appointed as non-executive directors, which is a matter of much less merit. The pool of well-qualified men for major companies is far, far deeper than the pool of women, which is precisely why the government is driving up the proportion of women on major corporate boards through the threat of quotas. And I'll happily take you through that.
But isn't the reality that women are still discriminated against in the workplace?
No, absolutely not. No, I came into business in 1979, Jonathan, the year that Margaret Thatcher was appointed Prime Minister. What woman in the last 34 years hasn't understood that if she works hard enough and she has the talent and applies herself, that she can go as far as anyone?
But do you not accept that many women, they do work hard, they do have the talent, then when they have children, when they have a family, they become the victims of discrimination in the workplace? Not
discrimination. It's simply that if you take a number of years out, especially in very fast-moving business world we have today, if you take, even 2, 3, 4 years out, you will be behind the curve. And that's a problem. Why, we wouldn't say if a man chose to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, we should do something to help him, go back to where he was. Why is it only women that somehow we have to give special treatment? Everyone, women talk about they want equality, but what they want is special treatment relentlessly.
You believe they want special treatment?
Oh, of course. Whenever the idea that this is about equality is nonsense. I mean, and the proportion of new female directors being appointed to FTSE 100 board has more than quadrupled in the space of 2 years because of government threat of quotas.
If you're listening to the programme and if you want to get involved in the conversation, 08459 455 555. We're about to speak to a feminist who absolutely, I'm quite sure, will disagree with the points that Mike is making. We'll see what she has to say. And if you also want to have your say, do you think Mike is talking sense or utter nonsense? 08459 455 555. This is the JVS Show on BBC Three Counties Radio.
Have your say on today's big phone-in.
The JVS Show.
BBC Three Counties Radio. Chet and Partook, every Sunday night from 6.
The great thing about my show on a Sunday night, well, I get to play some Bollywood classics. Or as a taxi driver once said to me, that foreign stuff. I like hearing your stories.
In a caste discrimination, the purpose is to degrade you, harass you.
And I get to meet lots of interesting people.
When people look at those trousers, the first thing they do is laugh. Do they look at the progress and where I am now? I've lost 20 inches off my waist.
Join me, Chet and Partook, every Sunday night from 6 here on BBC Three Counties Radio.
This is the JVS Show
on BBC Three Counties Radio.
Yes, it is the JVS Show, and in the studio with me is a gentleman called Mike Buchanan. Now, he describes himself as part of the anti-feminist movement. We've been talking about the fact that there has been quite a call this week to have more women in business. Apparently it will help the economy, it will help the country if we have more women in business. Mike absolutely disagrees with that. Well, let's speak to somebody who probably thinks it would be a good idea, and that's the feminist Caroline Criado-Perez. Hello, Caroline.
Hello.
Hi. Do you think we should have more women in business?
Well, to be honest, I sort of think that that's not really the question we should be asking. The question is really, why shouldn't we? And I've yet to hear a very good argument for why women should be excluded from the workplace in the way that they are. Furthermore, you have so many studies going back years demonstrating that the more diversity you have at the top of a business, the better that business does, which is just common sense, really. I mean, for example, women have the majority of purchasing power in the country, so you would expect that people would want to be able to market to them effectively, and you're going to market to women effectively better if you understand their needs, and probably if you are a woman. And of course that goes across all diversity and all minority groups. Companies would just do better if they had a more diverse workforce, and at the moment it's very, very white and very male.
Mike, you're shaking your head and mouthing rubbish while she's talking.
I am indeed. The idea that there are studies which show that corporate performance improves when more women are put into senior positions is a complete myth. Even the world's foremost academic proponent of more women on corporate boards, Professor Susan Vinicum of Cranfield University, admitted to a House of Lords inquiry last year that she had no evidence whatsoever to support the claim that putting more women onto corporate boards leads to improved performance. And we have 5 longitudinal studies showing that when companies drive up the number of women on their boards, corporate performance declines. It's mainly an inexperienced effect, not a gender effect. But as I go back to the point, the pool of well-qualified women for major corporate positions is a lot shallower than the pool of well-qualified men.
Caroline?
Well, I would like to pick up the idea of longitudinal studies, if I could. I mean, actually, there are many longitudinal studies that would say the opposite.
There are not. Caroline, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Morrissey is probably slightly more of the leading woman on board's proponent. But since Mike is so interested in the idea of longitudinal studies, I find it very, very interesting that in his earlier conversation with you, he quotes a study as if it's fact from mycelebrityfashion.co.uk. That was a study that says almost 80% of women prefer to be financially dependent on their own partner. And I suggest he reads, behavioural scientists' work like that of Daniel Kahneman, which talks very stringently about how, you need to think about the order in which questions are proposed and the way that they're phrased, because that has a massive effect on how people answer. And of course, apart from anything else, he did actually slightly mislead us in terms of what that survey actually says, because it isn't even 80% of women who say that they don't want to be in work. So, I wanted to point that out, that if we want to be talking about statistics and trying to throw longitudinal studies about,
Caroline,
use those.
Sorry, Caroline, can I just ask? We have challenged dozens of organisations and hundreds of individuals to come up with even one longitudinal study showing that when you increase the proportion of women on corporate boards, corporate performance improves. And we've had absolutely nothing from anybody. So if you know of any such studies, perhaps you'd like to tell us what they are.
But are you saying that performance would go down?
Yes, that's what our 5 studies say, exactly that.
So you feel that if there were more women in positions of power within business, performance would go down within companies?
That's exactly what those 5 studies say, and those are studies from Norway is probably the best known example.
But if I can be honest with you, just for 1 second, I mean, I work in an industry where we have lots of women, and I've been lucky enough to work for women mainly. And I far prefer to work for women bosses, because women bosses tend to be far harder working than men who are often lazy. Just my own personal experience. But many women work far harder than men.
Well, some do, some don't. But I'm not talking here about a public sector radio, Jonathan. I'm talking here about major private sector organisations. Which at the end of the day,
it's different. You think that women in private sector businesses wouldn't work as hard?
No, I'm not saying that. But the reality is, if you try and drive up the number of women on major corporate boards, you're inevitably driving up the number of inexperienced people on those boards, and the result of that is corporate performance decline. And we know that from Norway, Germany, and the US. And again, I come back to Caroline. I invite her to tell me even one study worldwide which shows that when you put more women onto major corporate boards, performance increases, because it is a myth.
Can I come in now?
Yes.
The idea that performance declines because, women are less experienced is simply untrue. There are plenty of women who are perfectly well experienced to take on these roles. They're just not being given them. And there's one thing I do agree with Mike on, actually, is about, you will be surprised, but I do, is that if women take a number of years out, that they might be behind the curve, and that's a problem. And one of the things that I found very encouraging about this report is that it's not just a sort of fix the women type approach, that it's also fix the business type approach. And I think that there are 2 major problems that we face, actually, in getting more women into business and into higher positions. One of them is the very low paternity leave that we have, which presents women as the primary caregivers, and inevitably means, as you said, when you have that idea of either hiring a man who's 28 or a woman who's 28, the employer might want to go for a man because men aren't going to be expected to take time off work. So that's actually something that's really negatively affecting women. And the other point, of course, is that I've forgotten what I was going to say. So.
No, it's fine. It actually brings us up to a nice point where we can take a break for travel news, and we'll come back to you very shortly. We have feminist Caroline Criado-Perez, who's on the line, and also Mike Buchanan, who's in the studio, who describes himself as part of the anti-feminist movement. We're talking about whether we want to see, as a society, more women in high positions in business. Do we feel that we need more women in powerful positions? What do you think? 08459 455 555. And we can all talk from our personal experience. Most of us that have worked in companies, we can all talk about whether we have found male bosses better than female bosses. We can all talk about what we think of our male colleagues as opposed to our female colleagues. Come on and have your say this morning. In your personal experience, do you feel that women tend to enhance the workplace more than men? Or is that very unfair? Is even the very prospect of suggesting that sexist in itself? 08459 455 555. I want to hear from you.
Travel news for beds, cards and bugs.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Anti-clockwise M25 busy from Maple Cross in towards 15 for the M4. And public transport at the moment, East Midlands trains and First Capital Connect are delayed by 15 minutes Luton to St Pancras. Justin Peterson, BBC Three Counties Radio.
Across beds, cards and bugs.
This is BBC Three Counties Radio.
It's 10:30. I'm Simon Oxley. The Duke of Edinburgh is having surgery at a private hospital in London today. The Queen will continue with a planned visit to officially open the BBC's new broadcasting house later this morning. The funeral of a man shot dead at a traveller's site in Hertfordshire will be held in Hatfield today. 21-year-old Thomas Ward was attacked on the Dyes Lane caravan site near Stevenage on the 23rd of April. The lawyer for Coronation Street star Bill Roache says the actor is looking forward to standing before a jury and protesting his innocence. The 81-year-old 19-year-old, who's the world's longest-serving actor in a soap opera, has been charged with indecently assaulting 4 girls aged between the ages of 12 and 16 in the 1960s. And in sport, Watford are to announce a new shirt sponsorship deal with online betting company 138.com. The Hornets are planning to announce the new deal later today, although the company have already posted details on a YouTube video. The weather, another fine and dry day, plenty of sunshine, maximum temperature 24 degrees Celsius, that's 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are the headlines. There's a full bulletin at 11.
Across beds, hearts and bucks.
This is BBC Three Counties Radio.
Yes, good morning. It's the JVS show. I'm Jonathan Vernon-Smith, talking about whether we need more women in business. Let me do some emails and some text messages before we move on. April emails me to say women are discriminated against in business now, today, right this minute. Anyone that thinks that this is not the case, live a week in any woman's shoes. Thank you, April. Paul says, I wouldn't hire a woman of childbearing age in my company simply because if they choose to have a child, it'll cost my company too much money, and it's a struggle as it is. I'll always find a better candidate in older males or older females. Thank you very much. Keep your calls coming through. Would you rather see more women in business? In the studio with me, I have Mike Buchanan, who describes himself as part of the anti-feminist movement. Also on the telephone, I have feminist Caroline Criado-Perez. I think it'd be fair to say the two of them are not necessarily seeing eye to eye. I just wanted to get on to the subject of the government at the moment, because, of course, there is another classic example where lots of people, lots of women in particular, are saying that the current government is not reflective of the population it serves. Caroline, would you agree with that view?
Well, yeah, clearly I would. It's not. We have 4 women in the cabinet, and it's just not really good enough. I just wanted to pick up on the text that you read out earlier, actually, the guy saying I wouldn't hire a woman of childbearing age. That just sort of demonstrates exactly what we're talking about. Because of childcare responsibilities and because of maternity leave, women are just facing really, really huge obstacles that men aren't having to deal with. Plenty of men do want to do childcare, so, the government should support them in doing that. But, yeah, the government is not reflective.
Isn't a lot of that, though? I don't wish to do Mike's job here for him. I'm quite sure he's perfectly capable of answering that question. But many of the audience, I'm sure, will be saying there is a biological difference between a man and a woman, and it is for that biological reason that when women, who are the ones that typically have their babies, and if they are breastfeeding, they are the ones that their babies will depend on, certainly for the first few months after giving birth to them. It is for that reason that women become the person who has to look after the child and take a break from their career in many cases. That's just a fact of biological life.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's the first few months. And I'm not at all saying that women shouldn't have any maternity leave. I'm just saying men should also have paternity leave, and it should be much more than the current very paltry amount that it is. And, once you get beyond these sort of very early stages, there are plenty of ways that you can get around it. If workplaces were more flexible, and if men were able to provide the care as well. And, when you start this kind of thing in place of women being the primary caregiver, and it's sort of entrenched in law. This is why we have things like the OECD latest figures, which show that women are still doing the vast majority of the unpaid care work. And then I'm not even talking about childcare. I'm talking about housework and all the other things that, as humans we need to do in order to be able to be productive at work.
But it's interesting that you talk about workplaces having to become more accommodating. When you talk about workplaces having to accommodate the fact that a woman may decide to have a child and will then be off work for a while.
A man decides to have the child too in most cases. It's not just the woman having the child by herself.
If the woman is the one that has to go and give birth, and for then a period of time will have a baby that is dependent on them and their body, then ultimately that accommodation you're talking about doesn't that cost a company money?
It does cost the company money, but I'm saying that it shouldn't be put all on the woman. It should be that the man is taking part of the responsibility as well. After all, they are 50% of the reason why the child is in the world. So they should be taking 50% of the responsibility for the child. And after the first few months, there isn't this need to have this constant mothering going on. There are such things as bottle feeding, and of course it's very disputed over whether breast really is best or whether bottle feeding is just as good. And I'm by no means an expert on breastfeeding, but there's certainly a lot of documentation to suggest that we don't need to be quite as obsessed with breastfeeding as we are.
Can I just come in here, Jonathan? I really dislike this narrative that childcare is somehow a burden for women and that they would much rather be in the workplace. There wouldn't be all this angst, that women feel about working when they'd rather be with their children if most women were like that. So it really, this is all to do with the feminist utopian dream of where men become like women and women become like men.
It's certainly not, Mike. It's about the fact that women are discriminated against because we are seen as high-cost workers. And so if you allow men, let's not act like men don't want to be involved in their children's lives. Look at Fathers for Justice. Men are desperate to be involved with children's lives, but they're not being allowed to because the government acts like women are the only people who are proper to be providing care for children. So, women and men are both being discriminated against in this way. And actually feminists who want equality, which is what feminists do want, is we want for men to be able to do their fair share as men want to be able to do as well.
Well, if you take Fathers for Justice and, in fact, other fathers groups like the Equal Parenting Alliance, which I know rather better, yes, those fathers are desperate to be involved in the life of their children, and who is it that?
Right,
but who is it, Caroline, that stops them? It's vindictive ex-partners assisted by the state, which makes sure that those men pay child maintenance, but in return doesn't ensure that they get reasonable access to their children.
A very high percentage of men are not paying child maintenance, and it's actually a form of financial abuse that is very, very well documented. Vindictive women are not trying to stop good men from getting access to their children. Certainly they will try to stop abusive men from getting access to their children, but I'm sure nobody wants abusive men having access to children because it's dangerous.
Can I pick you up on that?
As you say, the state, because of its sexist attitude towards women and its feeling that women must be primary caregivers, yes, they do discriminate against men in this way.
Mike, can I just pick up on the point that you just made? When you talked about vindictive, you were very careful. You didn't say vindictive women. It's Caroline that has joined the sentence up. But we knew what you meant when you said that. Do you think that the female sex, typically, are they vindictive? Are they clever and cunning and they've got some plot against us men to try and achieve a greater importance and responsibility in society than us men?
I think there are a proportion of women who are vindictive. I mean, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned and all that. Yes, there are a proportion, but the state helps them be vindictive. That's one of the things that we rail against.
Do you like women?
Of course I do.
So you genuinely like women? And
of course I do. I don't like all of them.
Well, no, I don't like all women. I don't like all men.
Exactly.
But I don't choose who I like and who I don't like based on the sex.
Exactly.
But you have close female friends. You have good relationships with women.
Of course.
Okay. So,
in fact, we actually, I run this political party, Justice for Men and Boys, and we have plenty of female supporters who see, who are very upset at the attacks on the rights of particularly their sons in a very feminized education system, but also they see their male friends, their partners, fathers, brothers being assaulted on many, many levels.
Let me go back to the point that I was trying to make a little bit earlier, and that's about the government.
Yes.
And about the fact that it would appear to some people at the moment that we are, as a country, being governed by a disproportionate number of men. The government, the cabinet, is made up of mainly men. In fact, there are only 5 women that attend cabinet meetings. Everybody else is a man. Do you see that as a problem, Mike?
Absolutely not. The reality is that far more men than women want to go into politics. I worked for the Conservatives from 2006 to 8, so I'm sure it's as true today as it was then. But you have to ask yourself, why is it a problem that men dominate the cabinet? Because it would be a problem, I think, if those men looked after men's interests and didn't look after women's interests. But for the last 30 years... The entire direction of all these male-dominated cabinets and governments has been anti-male and pro-female and pro-feminist. Men, if you like, when they're in positions of formal power, do not advantage men collectively, whereas women boast, there's plenty of evidence that when women are in positions of power, that they're ruthless in driving men out and disadvantaging men. And I'll give you an example of that, if I may. In the autumn, I gave testimony to a House of Commons Select Committee on women in the workplace, and one of the other people on this panel was a lady called Heather McGregor. Now, Heather McGregor has for many years owned...
Now, hang on one sec. Can I just stop you there? Are you about to libel Heather McGregor or say something that Heather McGregor will totally disagree with? No, She's not here to defend herself.
No, I'm going to tell you something that she boasted about to this committee. She has run for many years a headhunting company in London called Taylor Bennett.
Can I just distance myself on this radio station from the points that Mike is about to make?
And at the committee, she boasted that of the 22 employees and directors of the company, 20 were men. Sorry, 20 were women. And she actually boasted of that, and she said, she made some remark about,
perhaps she's proud of the fact that as far as she's concerned, lots of women had managed to, against the face of adversity, get ahead.
But there's no adversity. If a woman runs a company, that's what happens. That's gender balance when women are in control.
Amanda Murrell is the President of Bedfordshire Businesswomen. She's on the line. Hello, Amanda.
Hi there. Hi, Jonathan.
Good morning. I gather you wanted to have your say on this.
I did.
You're through to myself, Mike, and Caroline. What would you like to say?
I'd just like to say I've been listening for the last few minutes on what's been said, and I think it's all very well and I'll pick up on the point that Caroline made about surveys, that, the way in which you ask a question and the way that people answer it very much is about their understanding, and you can make statistics and figures stack up to how you want, but actually in the real world, and when you get down to it and you are actually out there in the workplace, women are disadvantaged, and there's no doubt about that. I'm President of Bedfordshire Businesswomen, and we were very pleased to win an award last night for the Federation of Small Businesses for Best Networking Group, and a lot of our members who come to our group feel that they are very much disadvantaged. And when Mike was saying that women don't have the same drive, that I'm afraid that's absolutely rubbish. And if you were to talk to the majority of our members, they have the drive. They are very focused. They want to get on in business. And the fact that if I went to my networking group and said, okay, so 80% of women would much prefer to stay at home and rely on their spouses to bring in the financial gains, they would be up in arms. I mean, it's absolute rubbish. I'm sorry, but it's rubbish.
Can I just make a point here? The women in your group, I completely understand what you're saying, but the women in your group, by nature of being in your group, will be untypical of women.
What do you mean by that?
I go back to the point that for every woman whose I go back to the point that 1 in 7 British women is work-centred, but 4 in 7 British men are. And this is Catherine Hackim's preference theory.
Actually, Catherine Hackim's preference theory has been heavily criticised by a number of not just feminist researchers and researchers on behavioural science. And again, I really, really recommend, Mike, that you read Daniel Kahneman on preference theory. However, to return to this hilarious survey done by a fashion magazine, the government's figures from the Office of National Statistics would say the absolute opposite, that women don't have drive and that women don't want to be in the workplace. And frankly, I'm more likely to believe a survey like that will have paid attention to the order in which questions are posed, the nature of the words that are used within the questions, and how much people understand what they're being asked, compared to a self-selecting survey online.
Can I just
by who knows who?
Can I just put my personal experience on this into this as well? Out of all of my female friends who have had babies, all of them apart from one. I've only got one friend who decided when she had a family that she didn't want to go back to work. Every other female friend of mine, their career has been so important to them that in many effects they have admitted to me quietly that they're quite looking forward to their maternity being over so they can get back to work and carry on with the job that they love so much. So to suggest, Mike, that they are not career-centred and they're not interested, women are typically not career-centred, that's just not the case as far as I'm concerned.
There was a very interesting... I'm sorry, go on.
You've only got to look at the age that women are having children. They're having children later in life because they are so career-focused and career-minded, and then they will have their children and then go back out into that career again. it just sounds absolutely a nonsense to quote those figures and facts.
But I think the reality for...
The other thing as well is that, we're kind of forgetting that for the most people, work isn't a choice anyway. People have to work. This idea that men can support women or women can support men is rubbish. Wages are not high enough.
I think you might have actually been partly making Mike's point for him then. He started nodding. It's the first time I've seen him nod when you've spoken, Caroline.
Yes. No, that's a very good point. I think an awful lot of women, it's said that, because so many women return to work, they want to, but plenty of surveys, and not just the one I talked of earlier, say that a lot of women, especially when their children are young, would rather stay with their children than go back to work. But economic reality means that they have to go back to work.
Probably quite like to be at home looking after their children, but some have to work because that's just the state of the economy at the moment.
But far more women than men would want to take that role. That's just reality.
Well,
you talk about reality, but Mike, I would say to you, it would be great to have you come along to one of our networking events.
I should love to.
Right, okay. Well, we can sort that out.
I'll wear a crash helmet, shall I?
I was going to say, I'd go with body armour on if I were you, Mike.
Sounds brilliant. I'll bring popcorn.
I really think that, you need to get in amongst some of these women, because it's all very well to actually sit there and say one thing about women and generalise as you have been, but actually you need to be in the real world and you need to be down there amongst them and not just look at statistics, because, as we've already agreed, statistics don't necessarily give you an accurate view of reality.
Ladies, Caroline and Amanda, stay with me, because I feel as if Mike's being picked on a bit. So let me bring a woman in who apparently has phoned in because she agrees with Mike. Anne in St Albans. Hello, Anne.
Hello, Jonathan.
Good morning.
Mike and everyone.
Yes, what would you like to say, Anne?
Well, I do to some extent agree with Mike. To my mind, I've brought up a very large family and I've worked doing men's jobs most of my life. I would have liked to have had what today is called a career, but I couldn't do that and give 100% to that career, and if I didn't give 100% to it, then I wouldn't have been worth the money I was being paid. So consequently, I did a series of men's jobs, truck driving, etc., where I could take time off and go back to them.
But lots of men don't give 100% to their careers, do they? I mean, lots of men are into golf, and they spend most of the day sending golf joke emails to all their colleagues, and
they won't get to the top either, will they? I do think it should be a situation where if you are determined, it doesn't matter what sex you are, you will work hard, you have the drive, the single-mindedness to get rid of everything else in your life and get to the top. And that's what I think women can't do. They're not built to do that. They're built to have children. Whether we like it or not, we're built to do that. And so we take so many other things into consideration in our daily lives where a man doesn't have to. He can remain totally focused on getting to the top. And there is a big difference between us.
But the problem, of course, was saying that, women will get to the top if they, try really hard and have this drive. But then you're up against people like that guy who texted in saying he wouldn't hire a woman of childbearing age. If we can't even get hired, how the hell are we supposed to... Sorry, swearing, get to the top. It's just not going to happen.
I feel your frustration. It's happened to me on a number of occasions where I couldn't even get through a gate with a truck one day because I was a female. And they came up with some ridiculous argument that I wasn't a union member and all the rest of it, just because I was a female. So I do know what it's like to bash your head against the ceiling. But that was 20 years ago. This is now. Women are very clever, and I think that if they really want to get to the top, they should use their deviousness, if you want to put it that way.
Oh, hang on a minute, Anne.
But that text that was sent in is now as well. So we're still having men openly saying... I mean, Alan Sugar said it, didn't he? He said that he didn't... Am I libelling him now? I seem to remember him saying that, though.
On your head be it. It's nothing to do with me. You're a journalist, you know what you're saying.
If you use Alan Sugar as a prototype for people that want to get on in the world today, I think he's 20 years behind the times, because people don't do business like that anymore.
I'm not using him as a prototype. I'm saying he is an example of an employer who discriminates against women of childbearing age. And
I'm sure. Can I just make it quite clear? I'm sure he does not discriminate against women of childbearing age. I'm quite sure he would never dream of doing that. Do you think? I'm interested to kind of draw this conversation to a conclusion, Mike. Do you think that you are going to win support? Because I know that you are politically motivated as well, and I understand you're going to be standing for election in Bedfordshire?
In Bedford and Kempston.
Okay, and you're going to be standing on this anti-feminist movement. Do you think you're going to get any support for this?
Yes, as far as the party is concerned, we really don't talk much about feminism because, you can support...
Why is that? Because you don't want to lose the female vote?
No. Everyone knows I'm an anti-feminist, but at the end of the day, we're trying to appeal to people who care about justice for men and boys, who care about their human rights, and that includes men and women.
Anne, would you vote for him?
I would, but I think I might be amongst the minority.
I think you might be. Listen, thanks very much indeed, Anne in St Albans. Caroline, thank you for your time. Very interesting speaking to you.
No problem, thank you.
There's the feminist Caroline Criado-Perez and Amanda Murrell, President of Bedfordshire Businesswomen. Thank you very much for calling in as well. Nice to speak to you too.
And Mike, that offer is still there. Come along to one of our networking groups.
I look forward to that.
Find us on the website. I'd love to speak to you.
Okay.
Right. Ooh, sounded slightly sinister, Amanda. I'd like to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed. Mike, an interesting discussion. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Mike Buchanan, he describes himself as part of the anti-feminist movement. If you want to drop me an email on that, jvsshow@bbc.co.uk.